Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. Gemini Brett here to dive a little deeper into the transits of today. On the Empire Pope's calendar, it's November 13th, 2021, Saturn's Day. And you know, Saturn's really been alive lately, no doubt. So the kind of highest energy I tuned in for today is this Mercury-Uranus opposition. We had the new moon was opposite Uranus. At the time of the coming full moon, which is a near total lunar eclipse, we will have Mars opposite Uranus. Unfortunately, Venus trine Uranus too. You can see that one starting to form. Today, this morning at 7:56:38 a.m. here, Pacific time zone, is Mercury opposite Uranus. And so these energies are really alive. It's a little bit different with a Saturn here on the square. Or in this case, we also see another square, Sun square Jupiter, Mars square Saturn, Mercury square Saturn. So these Scorpio Aquarius squares have really been alive. They've kind of been the themes of the month, to the point where I almost feel like broken record speaking about the tensions between the heart and the mind. Uranus tends to be a little bit more mental and away from the heart and like up in the spatial heavenly realms, if you will. But Uranus has been in Taurus for some time. TaUranus, right? And, you know, some modern astrologers suggest that Uranus is exalted in Scorpio and therefore in fall in Taurus. It's an interesting thing to look at. Rewind time, 84 years, and look what was happening on the Earth when Uranus was last in Taurus. Look at how things then related to now. And I'll just say one of the things that's kind of interesting in a comparison has anything to do with medicines that are not natural like these ones. I just want to like start with a little gratitude for my beloved. You got to know that my Virgo Venus celebrates having a partner who's hip to 10 mushroom formulas and other things, because I've had the some of these squares and I'm seeing it, how it relates to my nativity, catch up a little bit, and some things over here that won't last that long. And I'm really fortunate to be loved by someone who has magical herbal ways. All right, so there's that. Any opposition to Uranus is likely to bring in some of the traumas of our world. And our world is a rather traumatic place. We are coming into this near total lunar eclipse. And one of the things that you'll hear said about it is it's aligned with Lilith, which, by the way, means that the moon will be very far from Earth, and that's an interesting thing, and will be aligned to Algol. You'll hear this a bunch too. And I don't mean to use any condescending tone. I sometimes am a little freaked out by what people do with fixed stars. There's, I think, a really wonderful theory that I will be sharing when the time aligns about how that star Algol might be a place in space where a comet we saw like arrived from, that came and almost completely destroyed our species long ago. And I wonder if some of the things that are said about that beautiful star are based upon these old kind of experience or deep memories of something that was like a global trauma, a global catastrophe or cataclysm, cosmic cataclysm. And some of that comes from my learnings from Randall Carlson, who I think is amazing and great. And yeah, I feel some resonance there. So I always like to talk about comets and these global things, because I think that deep in our kind of amnesia as a species, there are some just core wounds that have blossomed in these weird ways of things you might call, patriarchy or Illuminati, or there's all sorts of things. And I'm not going to take that trip now because it's my favorite thing to talk about. And that means we'll be here all day. But look, I'm talking Mercury and Uranus. And so let's try to be quick with this one, okay? Plus, the dog needs a walk. And clearly, I could use some personal grooming time. Anyway, so, I mean, look, Taurus is in the mix, isn't it? So the Mercury opposite Taurus will likely bring our minds to traumas collectively and things we've been to. I've got to say, it is such an amazing honor to sit in the counseling astrologer's chair, and the trust that many of these amazing beings who I have the opportunity to, in an open-hearted way, to connect to explore sacred space, like the trust that they give me in sharing some of these just tragic tales that happen here on Earth. You know, it is a weird place in that way, and it's hard not to just fall apart when we try to explore what type of cosmology could allow such madness as this. Of course, we know there is also kiss and bliss and bless, right? It's not only the other thing, right? But we do know that there is a lot of pain in this world, and there's a lot of pain in our worlds. And there are times where we are encouraged to shift. There are times where we are kind of stuck in that mud, and it's probably the place we're meant to be, so the lotus can bloom from it and all the things, right? So these Scorpio Aquarius squares, I think, have been really interesting, just in like there's change here, and there's kind of there's also a stuckness, and there's this like slowing down in this Saturn thing where we want to review. But I think some really beautiful and important things are parallels that are happening right now. And I'm interested in seeing how I wrote about it. So there's a couple things I wrote that I want to bring in today. One is here, just so let's go with what the chart has to say. So Scorpio Mercury opposite TaUranus, as I've come to call Uranus and Taurus. So this is this morning, 7:57 a.m. Pacific, November 13th, 2021, Saturn's Day. Change your mind. Seriously, it's a choice. You have the power. You can change your mind entirely. Start by closing your eyes and exploring your senses. How does that smell, feel? So like, weird sentence at the end there, isn't it, right? Well, Uranus is weird. I like to call Uranus Doctor Strange. Why close your eyes and explore your senses? Taurus, right? Mercury doesn't only have to be data and looking out there. Like Mercury is Virgo too. Do you know what I mean? In this case, Mercury Scorpio, who is a detective going behind the sun, willing to look into the hidden places. And many of those hidden places aren't the unexplored territory that has not yet happened, but they have happened, and we've kind of suppressed them. And some things can really come up at this time for us to address these suppressed and have success with whatever rhymes with that would sound amazingly good. Right. So start by closing your eyes and exploring your senses. How does that smell, feel? Why feel? Scorpio. Pisces. Get really, really real in the feely, feel. Why smell? Because we know that it is perhaps the sense that is most intimately linked to memory, deep memory. Okay, the other thing is this: light bulbs. Nightlight Jupiter is following a heavenly path carved by Mercury and Mars by day. Revolutionary insights will arrive to those who gaze through the eyes of the heart. And that statement really also to celebrate one of my favorite records ever, which was a suggested listening I prescribed for Astrology Hub's Inner Circle this month, which is the wonderful Keith Jarrett with his American Quartet, as it was called in the 1970s. That's Dewey Redman on saxophone, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Paul Motion on drums. Keith Jarrett, in my opinion, the best piano player ever. And that live record called Eyes of the Heart, game changer, changed my life, and really encourages, I think, that musical, artistic way, experience, expression, and that's part of what this thing is about. Actually, yesterday on November 12th, found my way somehow to a record or a live concert that was recorded by that quartet on November 12th in the year of my birth, 1975. So it was like 46th anniversary of this concert, and I just like stumbled upon it in YouTube. And I love that so much because 46 also is a mercurial timing. So the sun Mercury would have been in the same thing 46 years ago when that concert was recorded. And they did one of the songs from this wonderful record, Eyes of the Heart. So there you go. That's where that language is coming from. But revolutionary insights will arrive to those who gaze through the eyes of the heart. Why eyes of the heart? Eyes, Mercury, heart, Scorpio, revolutionary, Aquarius. And I'm pointing to Saturn, but in this case, I should be pointing to Jupiter. I will say, when we look at parallels, which, by the way, are, as we say often, conjunctions in declination, right? So look at Mercury here, 14.5 degrees south. Mars, 14.5 degrees south. Jupiter, 14.5 degrees south, right? So Mercury and Mars, that they would be close, probably isn't too surprising looking at a chart, because there they are next to one another, right? We might expect Uranus to have an opposite declination, and it's somewhat so. That's called contraparallel, by the way. And the other thing, so Mercury and Mars, we'd expect them to be close, but why is Jupiter the same? How's that work? And then look at the sun at 18 south and at Saturn at 19 south. So there's a parallel also forming between the two of those beings, right? The gold and the lead, the sun and Saturn. So you see here on this convenient grid, thanks to Astrogold software, sun parallels Saturn, applying which means it's coming closer, 58 arc minutes away, within a degree. And that's usually the orb we'll use for parallels. And look at how close Mercury parallel Mars. He's now separating from that conjunction, and their so-called conjunction by declination. Mercury is applying to parallel Jupiter, and they're near exact. Mars is applying to parallel Jupiter, and they will perfect a little bit later. Let me show this to you on a map. I think it's one of the wonderful ways to see this. I will start by looking only at the equator, which is this line here. The Tropic of Cancer here, 23.5 degrees-ish north of that equator, right? So north of Hawaii and heading through Mexico and beyond, Africa and the Middle East and India, etc. This is the Tropic of Capricorn here through South America, South Africa, and Australia, right? And this curvy line you see in this moment, which was the moment of the Mercury-Uranus opposition this morning, this is the ecliptic, right? So it's weird to see it this way. We're taking like spherical things, yes, and projecting them Mercator style onto a flat map, and there's all sorts of weird distortions that happen, including that circles become sine waves or curves okay. So the ecliptic exists very importantly between the Tropic of Cancer, that's 0 degrees tropical Cancer, and the Tropic of Capricorn, that's 0 degrees tropical Capricorn. So the Tropical Zodiac is the celebration of the tropicals, which means the turnarounds. Like every year, the sun moves from its southern extreme at 0 Capricorn at December solstice when it shines directly above the Tropic of Capricorn. Makes sense. And then moves north from there, crossing the equator at equinox, and then finding the other bounds, or the solstice, sun stops at the other tropicos turnarounds, the Tropic of Cancer. The sun shining directly above the Tropic of Cancer when the sun ingresses tropical Cancer. And then it moves south for 6 months, crossing the equator at Libra equinox, September equinox, and then going into the southern signs, which are Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And the ecliptic does this every day. The sun, when it's visiting southern signs, is south of the equator, and when visiting northern signs is north of the equator. It's like that. It's true for the moon too, although only the sun is completely bound to the ecliptic, okay? Another thing I would say there is declination. What is declination? It's literally, technically, an angular measurement north or south of the equator, or the celestial equator when we're looking to the sky, which is simply Earth's equator, the plane of our daily rotation, projected into space. So what I'm going to show you now is astrocartography lines that are called the midheaven lines. So in this moment when Mercury opposed Uranus, right, Mercury was here with Mars. These are places like New York where the two were culminating, where they were at the midheaven in that moment. And then these places here in Peru, I mean, Mercury is so close to like Machu Picchu, is where those planets were directly overhead at the zenith. We couldn't see them. Why? The sun was there. They're traveling with the sun. They're traveling by day. Mercury's literally going behind the sun. Mars is just coming out from under the beams. But regardless, when the sun is at its midday height, and here in South America, the sun was directly overhead at the zenith. Okay, that will only ever happen at the latitude on Earth equal to the sun's declination at the time, because declination is the distance north, or in this case south, of the equator, you see. So we can't see Mercury or Mars when the sun is culminating, right? Especially if it was directly overhead, as it can be only in one place on Earth at any given moment of time. And that place will always be between the tropicals. This is the genius, one of the many geniuses of the tropical zodiac. This, by the way, is how we can see that Venus is out of bounds at this time. She's kind of coming back from her most extreme out of bounds journey, but she is literally currently overhead, a place that the sun could never ever go, because the sun is tied to the ecliptic, and the ecliptic exists by definition between the tropicos, okay? So Venus south of the Tropic of Capricorn is breaking the rules, right? She's way out. So the sun could only dream of going there, and maybe doesn't even know that we could dream a dream like that, right? So Venus says, freak out, let it loose. This is not your average Capricorn Venus, so ignore the memes that you're seeing online. All right. What I want to show you here is, well, Mercury and Mars are so close, right? I mean, they're conjoined in the zodiac. That doesn't mean that they'll be this close in declination. That also relies upon how far north or south of the ecliptic they are, right? So like if there was another planet here on the ecliptic where Venus currently projects to, you could see that Venus wouldn't be right there either, because Venus is far from the ecliptic right now. That's called southern latitude from the ecliptic. And southern declination is south of the equator. She happens to be doing this in this place of the zodiac, Capricorn, which itself is farthest south of the equator. So southern latitude plus a zodiac degree that has extreme southern declination already leads to, in this case, out of bounds south. All right, well, what I want to show you is this. Draw a straight line from Mercury and Mars here towards the east, and you will find Jupiter. See that? Or you can look down here in the bottom that I'm circling in Astrogold, and you'll see the latitude and longitude as I wiggle my cursor around. So here I'm near Mercury, and you'll see 14.5 south. If you'll remember way back when we were looking at that list, oh, where'd it go? That is Mercury's declination, 14.5 south. A planet's declination is equal to the latitude on Earth where that planet is overhead at the zenith. As the Earth spins, that planet will draw a line around the entire globe at that particular latitude. Right? So terrestrial latitude and celestial declination are connected. So Mars, 14.5 south, and then we look over here, Jupiter, 14.5 south. I'm rounding up and rounding down, but you can see they're very close, right? So I wiggle my mouse near Jupiter, who was overhead Lesotho. Oh no, that's north of there, overhead Africa at the time. And you see 14.5 south down there in the middle of the screen, okay? So this is a parallel, right? Jupiter and Mercury, Mars are certainly not conjoined at this time, right? The other one I'll point your gaze to is the Sun-Saturn parallel, right? But what happens is as the Earth is spinning from the west to the east, where Jupiter is right now over South Africa, later in the day, about their square, so about a quarter of the spin, which is what? A quarter of the day is 24 hours divided by 4, a quarter is 6 hours, right? So about 6 hours after this time when Mercury opposed Uranus, harder to see the contra-parallel, but it's there. Uranus is as far north of the equator as Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter are currently south of the equator. So you see that on the grid. Oh, and yeah, so we get Mercury parallel Mars, Mercury parallel Jupiter, Mercury contra parallel Uranus, Mars parallel Jupiter, Mars contra parallel. They like, oh, sorry, Mars parallel Jupiter, Jupiter contra parallel Uranus. I guess the Mars Uranus contra parallel is not quite in orb. All right. I have pretty strict orbs there. Usually we use, again, 1 degree for parallels or contra parallels. So literally Mercury and Mars, we can think of it in 2 ways. They are following Jupiter's course through the sky, or Jupiter's following them. And this is why I'm saying it's kind of interesting that I wrote it in the way that I did, which is that Nightlight Jupiter is following a heavenly path carved by Mercury and Mars. Because actually, Jupiter, right, is the one who's 6 hours behind them. And that's a really trippy thing, right? So let me show you that on the map again. Although it's tripping me out. I think because I kind of feel like I have it backwards, but conveniently it works both ways. But you can see I'm having a hard time here. Regardless, Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter are literally taking the same path through the heavens. They're rising in the same place on your, in this case, southeastern horizon. They're culminating at the same height, and they are setting in the same place in the southwestern horizon, just at different times. So you can actually look at it 2 ways. One, the Scorpio beings, Mercury and Mars, kind of come up, they carve this path, and then Jupiter gets to follow. Or another way would be Jupiter goes first and then they follow. And the weird thing is the latter looks true here on the map for some reason, but on the chart we can see that, and this is convenient in regards to this square, that what we say is that Mars and Mercury here, they're overcoming Saturn. I mean, we kind of wouldn't say that about Mercury, but about Mars. But all that, what that means is that these planets on this square, they're the ones that rise first, okay? And so that's true also in the Sun-Jupiter square. The sun rises first. So Mercury, I can say, is not being overcome by Saturn because Mercury's on, well, what we call the sinister side of the square instead of the dexter side of the square. And I'm getting into details of astrology that will just are already taking us way too far out. So back to Earth, back into the heart before the chart. When I think of this parallel, on one level, it's like to those who are willing to dive deep, right, and go into the pain and the pleasure and the life, right, and the sexuality and sensuality of the Scorpio-Taurus axis. I wrote this quote down the other day, which I saw in a film. I really loved it, which was just basically, what do you do in a storm when you're facing your death? The answer, the closer I come to death, the more I want to live. That's so alive in the Taurus Scorpio realm, right? And with Mars there, like, we really want to be considering these truths. So Saturn in Aquarius on the square, but Jupiter in Aquarius parallel. So the square is going to make sure that the tensions are here and it's rough. And if you're out at seas, there's some rough winds, you know, or no winds, which might even be worse because the worst thing to happen is to get completely stuck out there, right? But if we are willing to dive deep and to look into the pain and the shadow places and this kind of thing, then the reward will be that Jupiter follows and these kind of Jupiterian Aquarian insights. Aquarius, I am convinced because of its traditional Saturnian nature and otherwise in my experience and my outlook, like, is actually better if it takes its time rather than just going for the immediate kind of channeled kind of Uranian thing. And so Jupiter will benefit by Saturn being in the sign, but Jupiter is also Jupiter. It does it in a very different way. And that's why I say just like light bulbs, right? But again, it's like, go look at the world through the eyes of your heart. Bring your eyes, bring your smell, bring your senses to your heart, to some of the deeps that maybe you've pushed down and can no longer see through the surface level, which, you know, the world taught you is okay because light can touch that water. No, we want to be down in that place where these, you know, deep beings live. And then the insights, the other thing is this, like the Scorpio planets in their parallel will take much longer. It's more like 18 hours or 3/4 of the day, but they are also following the path that Jupiter laid out. So it goes both ways, and that's always true in any aspect. Like aspects are relationships, right? I mean, it's better to speak the name of the faster moving planet first, and that's very true. But in a parallel, maybe even more so, it's like looking at it both ways. So I can say, like, look at Jupiter in the night, and though you can't see Mercury and Mars because they're so close to the sun and therefore up at day when the sun rises to hide the sky and our, you know, planetary players and the stars. That you can know, like literally, if I just took out a marker and traced on my window the path that I watched Jupiter set last night or tonight, later when I watch the sun come through, I can know that Mercury and Mars are on that same path following Jupiter. On that level, if I'm willing to have like big insights and choose change, right? Like high, powerful, expansive spiritual change, and Jupiter's more powerful by day, by the way, you know, that I can then go deeper, right? So either go deeper and the benefit of beautiful change, or go to that beautiful change perhaps you've been resisting, and that offers the opportunity to dig deeper, right? So maybe you've been waiting for the floodgates to open, but you're not tied to that boat. Earlier, let me finish with that metaphor, even though it might be metaphor. Is like, you know, I used to watch at the locks in Seattle, right, where the locks connect the Puget Sound and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, to the lake system there in Seattle. And like it's Saturn. It's super slow, right? You're at this level, and they've got to, I guess, bring you down from the ocean level or up. I can't remember which, right? And the salmon are just doing their thing. Like there's a whole salmon run over here. You can go into a building, you just watch the salmon swim, whether they're going downstream or upstream. They're like not really concerned about waiting for these locks, okay? But although that also necessitated healthy and good design, right? And forethought. This came to me yesterday, and maybe I already said this, but that, you know, for Saturn, you spell planet, Planit, planet, right? And so these locks, they were actually built by the military. And, you know, so you're in this boat and you're just like waiting until they have to like flood this thing and get it to the right level, and you go into the next thing, and then you have to flood that, and it goes to the next level, and you go to that thing, right? Or, you know, and this will happen if there's like 5 people in a sailboat or something. You're just like, all right, Captain, thanks. And you just jump off and you just walk. And you can get right to the lake super quickly. It's going to take these cats hours, right? And people are there like honking their horns and partying or whatever, or they used to. And it's a fascinating thing to watch. But I always love like the cat who's just like, right, cool. So thanks for doing this work. And I'm ready to like make it a little quicker, so I'm just gonna jump off and like walk over there, right? Or run over there, or, you know, hop on a bike that I parked and cruise over there, whatever. Do you know what I mean? And so on one level, this, like, take our time. So if you're in the locks and that's where you're meant to be, good, because things are gonna change levels and find equilibriums, and you move along, and wonderful. And, you know, if somebody's in that place and you no longer are, it's totally cool to be like, hey, it doesn't take 2 to like man the tiller here. I'm out. Like, thanks so much. See you on the other side. I'm going to go home and get dinner ready or something like that, you know? Do with that what you will. Thanks for spending some time with me, friends. Your present is a presence. See you in space.